Hello, everyone, and welcome to panel 1B, Recovering Meanings from a Colonial Past. First, I would like to recognize our speakers for today. Our first speaker is Romeo B. Galang Jr. from the Far Eastern University. He will be presenting Rediscovery and Virtual Reconstruction of an Altarpiece from the Jesuits' Collegial Church of Our Lady of Loreto. Our second speaker will be Nick Estonilo, Will of an Empire, Ideological Struggles in the in Spanish Civil War and the Philippine Phalange. And our third speaker will be Franz Jan S. Santos of the Ateneo de Manila University. He will present Remembering Damaso, Ateneo de Manila High School's portrayal of late 19th century Philippine church from 1980 to 1999. Once again, please turn off your audio and video throughout the presentation. Questions will be entertained after all the speakers have presented. Okay, we can see the PowerPoint, but the audio is just a little bit garbled.
How will I set a headphone as a speaker?
Oh, there. We can hear you better now.
So, good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining this panel. My talk will focus on rediscovery and virtual reconstruction, but these challenges is little church of our legal project. So, background. Uh, the topic concerns the ascendancy of the Morgan King and the dispersion of the Jesuit holdings. Um, what do we know about dispersion? So dispersion as a concept is associated with ideas about distress and destruction. It is a concept that is about violence that results from the dispersion of cultural objects. You have concepts of loss associated with knowledge because once you lose cultural artifacts, you lose the associated meaning. And lastly, concepts further characterize the dispersion. Um, in the case of Cavite Puerto, Cavite Puerto was Cavite Puerto was where the Galleons up. The Manila Galleons are not really talking Manila but in Cavite Puerto. Dispersion, the Philippines experienced violent dispersion of cultural materials in the mid-1700s. Most of this occurred during 1750s and 1760s. And it began with the British invasion in 1752, wherein British troops sieged Manila and happened to break the walls of Intramuros during using Diego. At that time, the Governor General, the acting Governor General was the Archbishop of Manila, Archbishop Manuel Altarpiece, and everybody criticized him as being incompetent for the job. That could not be resolved because he was an archbishop and he failed to keep Spanish whatever he surrendered to the British. And shortly thereafter, Charles III, who was king of the two Sicilies, happened to ascend to Spanish throne. Charles III is heavily influenced by
Sorry, excuse me. It seems that there's problem with the audio again.
Okay, so Charles III happens to be happens to come from the two Sicilies in southern Italy, and when he ascended the Spanish throne, Um, he was heavily influenced by the Enlightenment period. So he was the Spanish king for reforms. But in working for the reforms, he encountered uh, oppositions from the Jesuits. And it was from this event that he had a special dislike for the Jesuits. And there happened to they formed a council in Madrid at that time. And one of the members of the council of the conscience of the council at that time was an archbishop, uh, Archbishop Basilio Santa Justa, uh, or one of the members of the council. And uh, when Archbishop Manuel Roja del Rio died, he was Archbishop and he was sent to the Philippines. And he was the one who executed the expulsion of Jesuits when the King of Spain ordered and signed the expulsion. The expulsion of the Jesuit was quite violent when it comes to cultural artifacts. Um, they first summoned all the Jesuits in the provincial house that was in Santa Cruz, uh, extramuros de Manila during that time, and they read the order, which led to the closure of Jesuit colleges in the Philippines. This included uh, the Colegio de San Ildefonso in Santa Cruz and the Jesuit Colegio Maximo de San Ignacio in Intramuros. Later on, they went to Cavite and they also closed the Jesuit College of Our Lady of Loreto. Um, the the College of Our Lady of Loreto uh, was well endowed at that time. You look at the inventory, uh, which was uh, which was done before the closure of this institution. Every item that you can see inside the church was logged on. So after logging on, these artifacts were dismantled and they were stored in a storehouse of leading citizens in Cavite. Uh, they transferred at least twice the uh, they at, they transferred these artifacts to another place at least twice during that time, and this led to loss of some pieces during the transit and due to termite infestation. Then for the next 250 years, nothing was known about these artifacts. So here we have the map of Cavite Puerto, and you can see the structure at the lower right, which is the Colegio de Nuestra Señora de Loreto. So there is also a town in Cavite. It's called at that time Santa Cruz Santa Cruz de Malabon. But before it became a town, it was part of the Hacienda de Malabon. This hacienda is owned by the University of Santo Tomas, and it is quite far. So the people are having problems when they want to avail of the sacraments because the roads were usually impossible, especially during the rainy season, because the parish of San Francisco de Malabon was quite far. Uh, it so happened that the hacienda was owned by the Dominicans, and the Dominicans interceded in behalf of the tenants, and they petitioned the Governor General for a house of worship to serve the spiritual needs of the people. The Dominicans themselves cannot build the church because the estate was under the administration of the Agustinians. So the only thing that the Dominicans can do was to petition the Governor General. And luckily, the Governor General acceded to his wish. A license was given in 1770 allowing for a small church and for a spiritual minister for the estate. For this spiritual minister could be the assistant parish priest, And this assistant parish priest has the option to stay in the estate or go back and forth between the estate and the parish church. Um, Besides allowing for the church, the wine for the mass and the oil for the blessed sacraments was also charged to the royal accounts. Um, in 1780, Santa Cruz de Malabon became a regular town, and the first parish priest was Bachelor Narciso Manas. Um, we find several traces of the administration of Bachelor Narciso Manas in Santa Cruz de Malabon, and that includes this bell. This bell is the Santa Cruz de Malabon bell, and it was cast during the term of the first Spanish priest. Not only that, sometime he also bestowed the church sufficient funds so that a stone church can be built. Um, And we know that this stone church was in progress when the 1791 visitation was done. This report is very important to us because it gives us an idea of what was what was in the Santa Cruz de Malabon holdings. Um, so it was this event that we came to know more about the church. So it is being constructed at that time, and we have a number of artifacts that came from the Jesuits. And that includes a pair of procession of candle holders for the cereales. And this was in the form of lions. We can see this in the inventory. But it also says that one of them was already broken. So if we go to, to the present town of Bansa, which is the present name of Santa Cruz de Malabon, you can still see this one. But according to some people, this is already a replica. It also, the 1791 visitation report also gives us an idea of how the altars of the church look like. There were three altars. One was the collateral of the Santo Nino. We know today that there's a Santo Nino, but we do not know if this is still the one that was written in the 1791 report. So this is the image that we can see at the lower part. And there is another collateral because there were two collateral altars. And it says that in this altar you can find the the crucified Christ in between the Blessed Mother and Saint John the Baptist. So if we go to Santa Cruz de Malawan, we can see that the attic of this particular side altar has a bas-relief with the same description. So that is the bas-relief of the Santa Cruz. In the present Church of Tansa, we can see another collateral, but if we look at it only, what concerns us is the lower portion. The lower portion contains the image of San Agustin as well as pillars that seems to uh, that because of stylistic elements may have belonged uh, to the Jesuit times. So these are the pillars. And finally, we have the main altar during the time of Narciso Manas. We can say that is basically the same as that of the 1791 report. There were two levels, as we can see the present altar. There were two levels, but it has been greatly modified. In the central niche, which we can no longer see here, was the image of the Our Lady of the Rosary. And flanking the image of the Rosary are the statues of Saint Peter to the left and Saint Paul to the right. These are not the original images. And above, second level, we can see another image of the patron of the church, the Santa Cruz. So here in this particular picture, the entire first level is probably from the 1791 report. as well as the very top of the second level. So fortunately for us, a document was found stating that a number of items were given to Bachelor Manas in 1784, which was part of the Jesuit Church of Our Lady of Loreto. And these include, among others, a wooden crucifix, wooden statues of St. Peter, Paul, and St. Michael, two lion-shaped processional candle holders that we have seen before, and an altarpiece of St. John the Evangelist with all its embellishments. So how would we know if the present altarpiece from dates back to this time? So if we look at this particular volute, we can see that there is a projecting element in the inner world of the lower volute. This is unique because it is found on only three other retablos. Uh, this one, Lubao, and Santa Ana in Manila. And because of the structure of this scroll, we know that this scroll extends to a second level. We can see that from the Lubao altarpiece, which has the second level, which is the continuation of the lower volute. So this is the detail. You can see the upper scroll, somewhat smaller in the second level. So if this, we now go to the virtual reconstruction of what could have been probably the altar in the Collegial, the Nuestra Senora de Loreto. So based on this main table of Tansa Parochial Church, we will reconstruct the altar. So these parts which form the main table today came from the Jesuit church. So this is the present collateral of San Agustin. The image together with the four lower pillars came from, is part of the original. We have to recreate the two additional middle ones. So we can build the second level. And then we have the altar of the Santo Niño. From the Santo Niño, we will get the upper part. So if we place this if this forms part of the whole, this becomes someone like this. And we recreate the upper volute. And we recreate the topmost part, which is the attic. This pinyals pineapple cane it can still be seen in Tansa, and the upper attic is this one. Then we place the patron of Santa Cruz de Malabon. And in the inventory, we have three images. We have two images at the first level, St. Peter and St. Paul. We have to recreate. We have to recreate St. Michael. So this is how the altar in Loreto would have looked like. It it's it's a artistic reconstruction because there are other ways of placing the post. So in conclusion, uh, dispersion, the process of dispersion was a violent one. It coincides with violent events in history, and in this particular case, it coincided with the Jesuit expulsion, which follows the British invasion. Uh, we can only recreate portions of town's history by knowing more about the artifacts as well as uh, verifying that particular documents which were also dispersed would probably add to the knowledge of, of these particular towns. And in this case, the dispersed materials came from three archives, and uh, reading them together, we can form a partial history of Loreto in Cavite City, which was totally destroyed during World War II, and portion of Santa Cruz de Malabon parish in Tansa. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, thanks to the Philippine Studies for having this opportunity to present my study or my paper. So before we start, of course, again, good morning, everyone. So I'll be presenting my paper or study about the Spanish Civil War, uh, particularly what happened in the Philippines. Okay, so my study is from 1936 up until 1945. So basically, we'll examine what happened in the Philippines, no, as a repercussion of the Civil War in Spain. Okay. So before I start, I would like to offer a brief overview of my paper. So just to guide us all throughout my presentation. So start with the Spanish communities. So those migrants who migrated to the Philippines or who flocked to the Philippines at the turn of 20th century. Okay, and those also who remained in the Philippines even before the last governor of Manila left the Philippines. Okay, so next we'll examine the Spanish Civil War, no, as a prequel, or sometimes they said as a prelude to World War II. Okay, so we'll also go through the Phil-Hispanic communities and how they secretly formed the Falange in Manila. Okay, and then it's called the Secret Axis. Okay, so next we have the Commonwealth. So it's the way of Falange. So intentionally because the Falange branch in Manila, they
Oh, hello, Nick.
then
Yeah. Hi, sorry, your audio is a little choppy.
oh,
It's okay, please continue.
hello.
Yes, hello, we can hear you clearly now.
Okay. So next we have the Commonwealth. So I intentionally put space there because again they had their own notion of Commonwealth. And just a coincidence that it all started then during the time of Commonwealth in the Philippines. Okay. So next we have the leadership in internal disputes that really plagued the movement from the very start. So in fact, if you see in the first slide, no. So my paper is from 1936 up until 1945. So it's a relatively short period of time because again they were plagued by internal conflicts from within. Okay, the so-called disputes within the movement, right? So next, of course, the occurrence of the Pacific War or World War II. No, so it only heightened or intensified the disintegration of the Philippine Falange. Okay, so if you have time, we'll next later, no, so we'll cover a special topic which is the Pan-Hispanism as opposed to the concept of Pan-Americanism. And of course, in the end, I'll provide some conclusion to wrap up my paper. Okay. So now the most difficult part of my paper is the documentation process because for some reason war documents were very it's really hard to maintain. Okay, so it's very scarce, no. And in fact, the major events actually happened not here in the Philippines but in Spain. Okay, so now you know him, right? So we have George Orwell. So he may be famous for his 1984, but equally important as well was his homage to Catalonia. Okay, so now George Orwell, joined the militia against the nationalist army led by General Franco. So he arrived in Barcelona at the tail end of 1936. And as soon as he arrived there, so he said that, or he conceived that the only thing you can do in that war or in that atmosphere, diba? So we're having that civil war. So the only thing you can do there is to fight alongside Franco or fight alongside Republicans. No? So that's what he did. So he fight alongside Republicans and then to fight against the right-wing coalition led by General Franco. Okay, so personally, I treat this account as a personal or first-hand account because again, it was written during the war. So he just recorded what he witnessed during the war, his struggles all throughout the war, right? So now again, we can ask, no? So why a civil war could spread overseas? So on the map, no, you can see the division between the Republicans, the color red, no, and the nationalists. Okay, it's in 1936, but later on in 1939, you can see that the nationalists took all the cities and towns. Okay, 3 years after the start of the civil war in Spain. All right. Okay, so now I'll show you the symbol of Phalangism. Okay, so you can see here a yoke and five arrows. So what does this mean? No? So the five arrows actually represented is something. No? So the five arrows represented the five kingdoms of Spain. So we have Castile, Leon, Aragon, Granada, and Navarre. Okay. So this symbol of phalangism takes us back to the time of Ferdinand and Isabel. Diba? So this particular symbol or badge was embedded through their flag. Okay, this one. So it's the phalangist flag. Okay. Ayan. So now, sometimes the civil war in Spain is very ideological, it's very intellectual, but I'll offer some overview of why it all started. Okay, so it all started in Spain. It's between the right wing army or right wing coalition versus the left wing or left wing Republican government. Okay, so basically they were just opposing one another, and basically right wing just wanted to prevent any left wing because they said na parang left-wing coalition could or would give way to Marxist revolution. Okay, so they wanted to prevail. They wanted to retake or to just to preserve the order in Spain. Okay, so in 1936, finally, so left-wing government won. Okay, so they won a landslide victory against the nationalists, and then it made Franco and other military troops to step up. Okay, so yeah, so this left-wing coalition also known as the Popular Front. And then from time to time, there were different waves of opposition. So they were rallying around streets, marching around the city proper. Okay. So now it's the picture, no, just to show you the division. Okay. So clear picture of who's fighting in the Republican side and nationalist side. So now in the Republican side, no, so we can see different groups or factions basically. So we have communists, basically changed through radical way. So we have socialists, anarchists, liberals. So the liberals there was the central force of the Republicans. Okay, so we also have peasants, town workers, and trade union. All right, and then on the right side, basically they were just opposing the left wing. So basically, everything opposite sa left wing. So for example, church and the army. So they wanted again to preserve the tradition in Spain. Okay, so they no longer have to accept any change from the outside. All right. So we have monarchists again to retain the power of the king and queen. So we have landowners and the Spanish fascists or the Falange. It was the central force of the nationalists or the right wing group. All right. So now going back to the Philippines, so we're now in the middle part of my studies, the Phil-Hispanic communities. So why is such a thing that first from a civil war it spread overseas, right? So in 19th century until 20th century, we can witness the growth of export in the Philippines, right? So of course it also paved a way for different or a new group called the Ilustrado. Okay, so basically at the turn of 19th to 20th century, so we can see another opportunities for this Chinese and Spanish mestizo. So basically, what I'm saying here is that during those period, no, so they were very wealthy and parang they could send their child abroad to study. So basically, their population grew or their number was around we're roughly around 800 to 4,000. Okay, that's a large number for Spanish mestizos and Spaniards in the Philippines. Okay, but during the American rule, they never really went away. Okay, so it never really went away, as shown in the table, no. So, for example, it's the 1903 census, Manila. So in Manila, you can see there were roughly around 6,000 residents, no. So combination of Spaniards and Americans. So again, that's a lot different, no, than before. All right. So in fact, in Manila, in 1938 census, no, shows that Malate area in Ermita, having 30% of Spanish speakers, while in Intramuros we have 20%. Okay, so in fact, it's the old picture of Casino Espanol. Okay, because many were billeted at the Casino Espanol de Manila. Okay, so this one was the renovated picture of the Casino Espanol de Manila. And aside from this place, no, because this venue, the Casino Espanol, they were doing some recreational activities, they were doing some social activities, okay, just to celebrate the Spanish victory, basically. Okay, ayan. So now let's go to the important figures during the I mean Philippine branch of the Spanish Falange. So on your right side, we have Enrique Isabel de Ayala. Okay, so that time he was the consul, and we have Andres Soriano, so the vice consul. Okay, so the Philippine Falange, they look up to them, no, as their leaders and main ruler. All right. So I'll discuss their role or bigger role during the Philippine Falange or the formation of the Philippine Falange. All right. So now it's a short na lang, no, background about the branch in Manila. So basically, we have the Fundación Falange Española. Okay. So this one was founded by Ignacio Jimenez. Okay. So Ignacio Jimenez was a wealthy businessman in Manila. But when he left for Spain, of course, there were other groups that took place, the group, no? So we have Juntas Nacionales and we have Junta de Manila. And for me, it's a standalone topic, the Junta de Manila. It's a very huge topic. Okay. So within the Junta de Manila, we can see different officials within the group. Okay. So we have again Enrique Isabel de Ayala, the consul, and Andres Soriano as the vice consul, respectively. Okay. So we also have the president of the Casino Espanol. We have the U.S. director, a superior of order, no? For example, Dominicans, Franciscans, no? So we have president of Hospital de Santiago. We also have the most senior Spaniard in the city and the representative of the Spanish Falange. Okay, so these were the officials in Junta de Manila, right? So now in Spain, so they were rallying for necessary aid or logistical support because there were some inadequacy of, for example, in the banner, no. So we have the medical aid for Spain. So they were, but they need some support from the former colony. Okay, as shown in the banner. Okay, so what they did was that they tapped, no. So they tapped the Philippine Falange, okay, for medical aid and logistical support. Right. So now we have the children section of the Philippine Falange, no? So now for me the most interesting part was the military formation. Okay? Because these 5 to 6 year old children, no, were taught how to march. We're taught how to shoot, we're taught how to sing the Falange hymn. Okay? I didn't mention here, but we have the hymn of the Phalanges, no? It's the Cara al Sol, no? Sorry, I just need to. Yeah, sorry, the Cara al Sol. Okay, and then yes. So again, these children were taught how to march to salute Franco. Okay, ayan. Then from children, no. So we also have the feminine section of the Philippine Falange. Okay, so this feminine section runs from 5-year-old preschool up until to nurses of the Falange. Okay, so they were carrying a flag, right? And on the flag, you can see the logo, no, or the symbol of the Phalanges. It's the yoke and arrows, right, representing the 5 kingdoms of Spain. All right, yeah. Again, the feminine section. Okay. So in my paper, it's the longest part because basically it's the information section of the Philippine Falange. So basically, wrapping up for example, the population, demographics, the politics, grievances, and their manifesto. All right. So for the demographics, at the beginning, so there were roughly around 800 phalanges in Manila. Okay. So they grew their organization within Manila. We also have in Iloilo and places like Cebu or Camarines. Okay. So in politics, no. So fun fact about this one was that when Quezon, diba, he run government, right? So he was supported now allegedly by a Spanish party that really helped him elevate to power. Okay, and then for their internal politics, no, so they acted almost independently without any instruction from Spain. So yes, at the beginning they were, receiving some orders and instructions from Franco in Spain. But for a time being, they acted almost independently without any help or instructions from Franco. All right. So for the grievances, there are a lot of things that they need or they wanted, no. Pero we could summarize this as this, no. For example, in Philippine history, there's a recurring theme that it's a recurring theme but highly contested one because diba, in some books, parang it stated that the first Filipino was the Insulares or or the Spaniards born in the Philippines. So they said, "Oh, we're the first Filipino, right? So we need to bear the identity as Filipino. So parang we have a right to become Filipino, basically, right? Yeah. So throughout the period, parang they were seen as someone who's really rallying for their own identity in the Philippines. Okay? And for their manifesto, okay? So basically, they wanted to phalangize the community, as how they wanted to propagate their group, no, from children to women. Okay? And there's a different social charity fund, no, just to help the Spaniards fighting in Spain. All right. So basically, since it's a special branch of Falange in Manila, so of course they were sending aids, exchanging information with Spain, right? Basically helping them, the nationalists, to fight alongside Franco. All right. So now from the very start, that's why the movement didn't last long, right? So it only lasted from 1936 up until the early part of 1940s because leadership really took them a pause, right? Because, for example, from the very beginning, so there were some problems within the organizational parang party, right? So who to lead, who's in charge every time the Spaniards going to Spain, right? So it's not clear who's going to lead the movement. Okay?
Okay, great. Excuse me. Please begin to wrap up your presentation. There's only 3 minutes left.
Yeah, 3 minutes. Okay. Since we have a very limited time, no, so I'll have to wrap up my study. So basically, we're just in the ending part na, no? So we have the leadership disputes, no, and the Pacific War. Okay, Pacific War, no, it only heightened or it only seemed to intensify the disintegration of the Spaniards in the Philippines or the Spanish legacy in the Philippines. Okay, so usually, technically, when the Allied forces, right, um, defeated, right, the Axis power, all right. So now the group, no, or the movement, okay. So they just resorted to having their grievances without no political achievement. So in this picture, you can see phalanges in Manila. In Manila, okay. So they were the officials of Philippine Falange, and then they took a picture with themselves, no, with Hitler in the background. So basically, they just look up to Hitler, right? So basically, since then, so they're not really having this public beating. So they have it secret na lang. So that's why we have this ID. It's the Phalanges card for secret agent, parang just to hide their identity. It's in 1959, right? So again, Panispanism, there's an attempt, no, to revive the growing culture of Spanish in Manila. It was exposed by the American propaganda. So they said that the Spaniards were trying to bring back their old tradition as opposed to Americanism. Okay? But there's a new nationalism that really happening that time. So this nationalism embarked on the fight, no, against Occidentals. So basically, they no longer accept any Occidental influence, right? It's because of their new nationalism. It's the logo of Pan-Hispanism, right? So again, they're just meeting, no, without political achievement until they totally disintegrated. Okay, some around 1940s, early 1940s. But again, up until 1945, there were some grievances for identity and some grievances for community recognition. All right. So conclusion again, from a civil war, it really spread, no, to the former colonies because it's a civil war, but they also tapped the former colonies in Manila and some countries from Latin America. Okay, so again, we can see in the civil war that there were two factions, Republicans and Nationalists, and then for a time that they already reached a stalemate. Pero with the service of Palanga in Manila, it can it didn't match the Republicans. So because Palanga was very intense as a group, basically. Okay. So again, they set up parallel organization like women's section, we have children's section. Okay. But what? It's the last point, no? what they really accomplished was that from being a minority party from around 800, okay, so they grew their number up until up to 4,000. So it's a lot different. Okay, so again, they transformed themselves as minority to a mass party, and basically that's my paper is all about. Okay, thank you. Yeah, the end of my presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, and I apologize again for the context. But good morning, and I school and the college as well. And this paper is a product of my interest in history, education, and collective memory, particularly memory about how people remember the Catholic Church. So, for example, just to give you an idea of some of the inspirations of this study, back in 2010, if you remember the Damaso by Carlos Cedra. So he went to Manila Cathedral holding a card that says Damaso, the church for the RH bill. Now, appealing his case, 3 years later, that Cedran said the time of Damaso is not yet over. As a matter of fact, Damaso is flexing his muscles to get back. And then in 2016, President Rodrigo Duterte won the presidency.
Franz, sorry, your
Was
audio.
struck a chord.
Hi, sorry, your audio is a little garbled again, and
Oh, sorry.
it's okay. And maybe you'd like to put your presentation on full screen or slide mode.
Is it better with this one?
Okay, yes, we can hear you more clearly now.
Okay, sorry. Okay. So another issue before was about church hypocrisy. When the president won, for example, in 2016, a lot he called the church a hypocrite and lambasted the church for many things, and it struck a chord with some people who were frustrated with how the church was perceived to be corrupt. Some of them noted contemporary issues, but some went as far back as the Spanish colonial period for comparison. And these instances reminded me of similar sentiments I have heard of in the past. There, no, when again, so when I was teaching and having and when I was a part of teacher training, I found a lot of students and teachers described found in Rizal's Noli and El Filibusterismo. So I was quite surprised that such characterization endured not just in formal education, not just in popular memory, but in formal education.
Hello, Franz, are you still there?
And lastly, in both academic circles. Yes. Yes. Yes, I'm here. Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Yes, yes, we
Can
can
you
hear
hear
you.
me?
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, Schumacher was just saying that the church is not so represented and in popular memory and in education. So in some way, the paper I made is trying to validate his argument in the level of basic education, particularly in my own institution, the Ateneo de Manila High School. So I argue that 19th century Philippine church was largely, yet understandably misrepresented in class discussion, reflecting its characteristics. Now, go on this most churches partnership of social thought in Manila from 80s and 90s, as well as books. We get your 19th century Philippine church. Although there are two um, main parts, it's why the results are I said, no, most students get their idea of the Philippine church from Rizal's novels because it's required by law. And number two, because of the type of education that they got after World War II, after independence. So, um, a significant role on how the Philippine church was depicted was the nationalist education that Filipinos got during the post-war decades. So, for example, in the field of history, there was an intellectual battle on what type of nationalist framework we should use. No? And for example, Ileto in 2010 mentioned something about the secular nationalists versus the Catholic nationalists, which I will discuss shortly. So post-war, here are some of the leading historians during that time. Of course, the UP group of Teodoro Agoncillo and Renato Constantino. And for these individuals, for these historians, they claim that they tell the history of the Filipino people from the perspective of Filipinos and they're writing for Filipinos. It
Sorry,
was a, yes.
sorry. Could you orient your presentation landscape?
Okay, sorry. I keep. I mentioned a while ago, if you caught it, no, when we were talking about what type of nationalism we should adhere to after World War II, these are the leading voices of the nationalist movement, the UP group of Agoncillo, Constantino, etc., who claims that history, they're telling history from the perspective of Filipinos, and it was a breakaway from the colonial narratives, which resulted to marginalization of religion in the struggle against colonial rule. There are other voices, though, Catholic voices in particular, one of which is Father Horacio de la Costa, who was also considered as the authority of Rizal by his contemporaries, and of course, Father Schumacher and Nicholas Kirchner. And the funny thing is, all these three are worked a lot in Ateneo. They contributed a lot to the Philippinization movement in Ateneo, but they will not be the most cited sources by Ateneans and even by the outside community when it comes to education. Schumacher even says a lot that Constantino is ignoring him now. Agoncillo, Constantino, and the rest will continue to dominate the narrative of history education for the next 4 to 5 decades. Okay? And this will be shown at Ateneo de Manila High School where I work, especially during the 80s and 90s. So where do they get idea about 19th century Philippines? There are two subjects. One is social studies, or what we know as Araling Panlipunan today, and Filipino. When I asked the teachers and the coordinators or the department heads, what their main source that social studies teachers used before was Agoncillo's History of the Filipino People, which is his most widely read work and most published as well. And it was also very critical of the church. For example, he mentioned um, it was not until the 19th century that the friars reluctantly gave primary education to native children in classrooms. The children were daily subjected to physical and mental tortures. They drop out of school because of punishment, etc. They also mentioned, for example, that parish periods caused much oppression to the masses. He shackled the masses. In the eyes of the people, the parish priest was the real representative of the king. He made accusations as well that the friars were the enemies of progress, they opposed reform, and they're greedy because they had so many friar lands. Now, by the 1990s, the church started, sorry, the church, the social studies department started using textbooks that are primarily made for high school because Agoncillo's was for college. And however, the textbooks during that time basically echo the prevailing narratives during the 80s and 70s and even 90s. So since these textbooks placed high value on nationalism, there was a tendency or sometimes a deliberate effort to highlight everything Filipino and vilify things that are perceived to get in the way of nationalism. So a good example, for example, is this quote from a 1994 textbook. So, for example, they said that the Spaniards acted like kings. They controlled every aspect of Filipino life. They looked down on Filipinos, considered them illiterate. They mocked them. They despised intelligent Filipinos. They stole their lands and abused their women. And this is the part that I like. The Filipinos endured the abuse. They could only bow their heads in shame in the face of humiliation and all kinds of abuse. They extended their patience and forgave in accordance to what they were taught. that what they were taught, sorry, in Catholicism. So, given the limited perspectives and inaccuracies of many textbooks before, some teachers in social studies decided to write their own book in 1999 with the help of some of their MA classmates who are studying history. And I especially thank one of the authors of the book and my former chair in the Department of History, Dr. Liana Havana, for providing crucial information for this study. So, as noted by Dr. Habana as well, the authors deliberately avoided using previous textbooks as references and utilized mostly primary sources and more recent narratives. And that departure from the prevailing nationalist type of reading of history can be seen in how they described the priests, for example, especially in the 19th century. So I just translated it. It was better in Filipino. So perhaps most people think that priests had nothing to do with nationalism and were obstacles to the development of Filipinos. But the truth is that secular priests in the Philippines were at the forefront of demanding equality with Spaniards. It was no surprise as well, since they were the most educated sector in Philippine society. Um, Aside from social studies, there is some discussion on late 19th century Philippine church in Filipino when they discussed Noli and El Fili. So it was used to contextualize novels. And aside from that, usually when they discuss the priests or the friars, they have a thematic approach to it. So, for example, the theme is the broken church, with each priest or sorry, with each friar representing a particular flaw of the Catholic Church. Then, so commonly highlighted issues are greed, immorality, racism, etc. But again, the analysis was largely literary, and the frameworks used were vary from Marxism, postmodernism, etc. Um, there were other sources, like for example, there's this guidebook, like I don't know if people still know Spark Notes, no? But it's kind of like that during the 1990s and 80s. That mga tulong sa pag-aaral ng Noli at mga gabay sa pag-aaral ng El Historismo are basically books that help students to navigate the novels. There were some discussions on history, but again, very brief and insufficient. Okay? So just to summarize, these are four of the usual characteristics of how the church is depicted, the 19th century church is depicted in these discussions. Enemies of progress, corrupt, hungry for power, immoral. In my paper, I tried to explore the reasons for such charges and also nuance them based on more recent literature. And the hope is that I just really want to help fellow educators navigate this controversial topic in Philippine history. But given the time constraints of this presentation, let me just go very quickly now. So, for example, on the charge of being enemies of progress, I think what's lacking usually is an understanding of historical context. What was happening in Spain then? Why are they against liberal reforms? It is not usually mentioned or discussed that the priests were massacred or were deprived, where their lands were confiscated in Spain. And that's why they're like that. No? Um, there's recognition yet, or there's a lack of recognition yet that the Ilustrados, as revered as they are by us, no, are not the only sources of information for 19th century. So, but I think the greatest charge against the friars and their anti-progress characteristic was supposedly in the area of education. However, as proven by many historians already, such as Schumacher and Mojares, that the church success in education, especially higher education, was undoubted. For example, when you talk about literacy rates, it's also the literacy rate in the Philippines in the 19th century is basically the same as that in major Spanish cities. So they're giving us the best that they had. And Juarez even mentions that nowhere else in Asia was such a colonized race given that much education.
Okay, great. So, friends,
Okay.
could you please begin to wrap up? You've got less than a minute left.
Okay, just to wrap up now. So I mentioned, for example, let me just go to the final thoughts. This is just a preliminary study on church history and collective memory. How much has changed in the high school? Well, so much has changed after 1999 in terms of the books used, frameworks used. In the Philippines, there's a K-12 reform which is now teaching history, Philippine history, 2 years instead of just one. Hopefully, going for more depth. But let's see, because they're now catering to grade 5 and 6, so they're younger kids. So That's it, and it's completely removed from high school. And just to end this paper is basically the point is to have an accurate knowledge of the church's historical role in nation building, and hopefully that knowledge can provide a firmer ground for the church's mission today, both for its clergy and for the Filipino Catholics who claim to profess the faith. It is particularly timely now as we commemorate the 500th year of Christianity's arrival in the Philippines in 2021. And I also thank Father Tony De Castro for helping me with this paper before. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your presentation, Franz, and apologies for the rushed ending.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Understand that we understand your situation right now. All right. So with that, I would like to ask I would like to ask June, Franz, and Nick to please unmute and switch your videos on for the question and answer portion of our panel. All right. So the panel is now open for any questions from the audience. Please click on the raise hand button to be recognized. And when you are recognized, please introduce yourself and state your questions directly. Alternatively, you can also use the chat box and I can read them out for you. Okay? Okay, yes. So, okay, yes, Marlon, we see you. Oh, wait.
There we go. Hi. Good morning to all of you, and good evening from my end here in Michigan. Great papers, and like I really wanted to, I would want to read them when they get published eventually. My question is for June. I would like to know if there's any attempt to recover the retablo of the church that you mentioned, because like it seems like it's a well documented project. I don't know if like on the parish level there's any attempt to recover the retablo. Thank you.
Oh, hi, Marlon. Thank you for that one. I haven't spoken yet with Father Virgilio Mendoza. I tried calling him so that he can watch his video, but I failed to. Maybe the parish office was not open. Uh, they're not aware. I talked initially with Father Mendoza, but saying that this could be probably from that place. At that time, I still don't have the exact narrative, but now, today, I think I'll go back to Tansa to give a presentation to Parliament of that. Sorry, there's still long barrier. They're not aware of this one. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Uh, wait. Okay, do we have any more questions from the audience? Okay. So while we're waiting for some questions, uh, I also have a question for June. I would like you to expound a little bit more on your quote earlier about the one that involves disappearance at the beginning of your presentation. Can you please tell us more about that quotation?
Uh, when I was doing this paper, the guiding concept, my guiding concept was dispersion. Because when I looked at mid 1700s Philippines, a lot was happening at that time, like the British invasion and the Jesuit expulsion. Because of these two violent events, a lot of Philippine raw materials were either taken out of the country or were simply distributed among other parishes. Some of these include furnishing the parishes as far as Batangas with artifacts or religious ecclesiastical materials coming from the Jesuit colleges. And this includes the college in Santa Cruz, Colegio Maximo de San Ignacio in Intramuros, as well as the Loreto College in Cavite. The Cavite dispersion uh, is quite uh, violent because it involves the consecration of the church. The church was subsequently destined to be a quartel for the Spanish troops. So So they had to bring out everything from the church. And one of the one of the one of the engineers from the fortification of the Philippines of Manila went there to design the church as a quarter for officials and troops of the Spanish army. So this version as a concept uh, involves disappearance, loss, especially with regards to knowledge, because when cultural materials were uprooted from the place that were originally meant to be, the knowledge that's supposed to be gained from that area subsequently lost. A new knowledge will be formed in its new place. I hope that clarifies your.
Ah, I see. All right. Thank you so much for answering my question. And now I think Marlon has another question. So let me read it out. Okay, so this is for Franz. Marlon says that he finds certain resonances between your paper and his own, and he was wondering if there is any attempt on the part of the Ateneo High School to offer that alternative narrative in your curriculum. Okay, so Franz, can you answer
Thank
the
you.
question?
Okay, thank you for that question. Yes, I think begin around 2006 onwards, there was a more deliberate effort to include church narratives, not really just for not just because we're a Catholic school and a church school, but it's really more for historical accuracy. And I think we supplemented the books as well by writing our own articles, and it really helped. That at one point, I can't remember the year exactly, maybe 2010 or 11. A Jesuit historian was assigned to the high school to serve this regency, and that really opened up our eyes on other sources to use for Philippine church history. So there's around two or three of us who are really passionate about this, and we tried to write articles and make more deliberate attempts at using it in our discussions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that answer, Franz. Okay, do we have any more questions from the audience? Oh, sorry, Marlon, do you have another question? Oh, okay. So if you don't have any more questions, please lower your hand so that we can allot the. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so June has a question for Nick. So, what was the situation in Manila as the Spanish Civil War was raging? How polarized was the Spanish community here?
Yeah. Okay. So the situation in Manila at the time during the Spanish Civil War is very because in Manila they were trying to imitate the Spanish phalanx in Spain. So basically, they wanted to imitate all the children's section, the women's section, the orders from Franco, and of course, this topic, bordered around two wars, no. So we have the Spanish Civil War, and after 3 year after, no, we have the World War II. So basically, more on very you can see the difference between ideologies, no, between the nationalists and Republicans. But for a time being, in Manila, they were roughly around 800 nga na they're staunch nationalists in Manila. Pero when I read the accounts, no, so they avoided such violence. Okay, so they're just really rallying for their grievances and identity without including some violence. Okay, so basically, sa relatively period, no, I mean, relatively peaceful time, no, with their grievances, no, in for identity. Okay,
Thank you very much.
yeah,
Sorry. Okay, hello, can you hear me? Okay, great. So thanks again for answering June's question, Nick. Now we have a question from YouTube from Abraham L. San Pedro City College of Angeles. His question is, what is the meaning of Falang? Falang? Is Phalangism related with fascism?
Yes, yes, yes. Yes. Hi. So, Spanish phalanx, no? It's the original term, no? And then Manila, in the Philippines, they tried to attempt to imitate the Spanish phalanx. So yes, it means the fascism. At that time, there's a number of fascists in the Philippines. So they were meant to support Franco. So they called themselves as Franquista. Okay. So they were willing to help the Spaniards or nationalists in Spain. Okay. So by sending aids, by sending logistical supports, and by sending some, money or goods, to the fighting nationalists in Spain. So yes, they supported fascism. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for answering the question. Do we have any more questions from the audience, from our participants here in Zoom? Okay, so if there are no more questions, thank thank you all for participating in this panel, and thanks to our presenters for their wonderful presentations. Okay, and now we will be returning to the plenary. Please do join us again in the next session of our conference at 10:30. Thank you so much.